Room where the future of the British monarchy was quietly dismantled and rebuilt in the span of 47 minutes was not the throne room, not the Privy Council chamber, not the grand state apartments where centuries of precedent have been forged in ceremony and gold leaf. It was a small, windowless medical consultation suite on the ground floor of Buckingham Palace, furnished with 4 chairs, a steel examination table, a locked cabinet containing pharmaceutical supplies, and a single overhead fluorescent light that hummed at a frequency just below conscious perception. The room smelled of antiseptic and cold air. There were no portraits on the walls, no royal crests, no reminders of history or heritage. Just 4 chairs, a table, and the terrible weight of what was about to be said. King Charles III sat in the first chair, his posture upright, his hands resting on his knees, with a stillness that was not calm. Prince William sat in the second, his body angled slightly forward, his eyes fixed on the 3 physicians standing before him. Princess Anne occupied the third, her expression unreadable, her arms crossed. The 4th chair was empty. It had been reserved for Princess Catherine, who was delayed in transit from Kensington Palace and would arrive 11 minutes into the meeting. But Charles did not wait for her. He did not wait for anyone, because what the doctors had found and what he was about to do could not wait. Not for Catherine, not for protocol, not for the slow, careful machinery of institutional consensus that had governed royal decision-making for 300 years. The senior physician, Dr. Sarah Pemberton, a consultant neurologist attached to the royal household for the past 9 years, cleared her throat and opened the medical file in her hands. She looked at the king, then at William, then at Anne. She did not sit down. "Your Majesties," she began, and the use of the plural was itself a signal. This was not a private consultation. This was an institutional briefing. "I must inform you that the results of His Majesty's comprehensive neurological assessment, conducted over the past 14 weeks, indicate a progressive condition that requires immediate and significant modification of his working schedule." The room went silent. The fluorescent light hummed. William's jaw tightened. Anne's arms remained crossed, but her fingers pressed slightly harder against her sleeves. Charles did not move. He had already read the report. He had already absorbed the diagnosis. He had already made his decision. And that decision, the one he was about to reveal, was not the one the doctors expected, not the one William expected, not the one the institution had spent decades preparing for. Before we reveal the decree that Charles issued in that small windowless room, the decree that shattered every assumption Prince William had ever made about his future, before we unpack the medical condition that triggered this crisis and the constitutional earthquake that followed, make sure to hit subscribe to Crown Watch and turn on the notification bell. Because what we are about to walk you through is not a health update. It is not a scheduling adjustment. It is the most radical restructuring of sovereign authority in 300 years of British constitutional history. And it happened in a room with no windows, no witnesses, and no record. Let's rewind to the beginning. Because to understand what happened in that room, you need to understand what led to it. And what led to it began not with a dramatic collapse, not with a public incident, not with a tabloid photographer capturing a moment of weakness. It began with something far more insidious. A pattern. A pattern so subtle that for months only one person noticed it, and that person was not a doctor. It was Princess Anne. Anne noticed it in October of last year, during a routine investiture at Windsor Castle. The king was presenting medals to a line of recipients: military personnel, charity workers, scientists, teachers. He had done this hundreds of times, thousands of times. The choreography was muscle memory. Step forward, extend the hand, speak the name, pin the medal, shake hands, step back. A rhythm as reliable as breathing. But on this particular day, at the 43rd recipient, Charles paused. Not a long pause, not a dramatic hesitation, just a half-second of stillness where his hand hovered over the medal box as if he had forgotten which hand to use. Then he recovered. He pinned the medal. He spoke the name. He moved on. No one noticed, except Anne. Anne noticed again 3 weeks later, during a private audience with the Prime Minister. The king was discussing agricultural policy, a subject he knows intimately, passionately, down to the molecular level of soil composition, but mid-sentence, he lost the thread. Not the argument, not the point, the thread. The connective tissue between one thought and the next. He stopped. He blinked. He looked down at his notes as if seeing them for the first time. Then he resumed seamlessly, as if nothing had happened. The Prime Minister didn't notice. The Private Secretary didn't notice. But Anne was watching from the adjacent room through the half-open door, and she noticed. The third incident occurred in December at Sandringham. Charles was hosting the traditional family lunch. 23 people around the table, conversations overlapping, laughter, the clink of glasses. Charles turned to his grandson George and asked him about his school term. George answered. Charles nodded. Then 4 seconds later, he asked the exact same question again. Same wording, same intonation, as if the first exchange had never happened. George, bless him, simply answered again without comment. Catherine, seated across the table, looked at William. William looked at Catherine. Neither spoke, but both filed the moment away. Anne did not file it away. In January, she requested a private meeting with the King's medical team. Not through the usual channels, not through the Lord Chamberlain's office. She called Dr. Pemberton directly on her personal mobile at 10 p.m. on a Sunday evening. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Anne did not diagnose. She did not speculate. She simply described what she had observed. 3 incidents, 3 months, 3 moments where the King's cognitive continuity had fractured briefly, almost invisibly. And then she said 5 words that set everything in motion. I need you to investigate. Dr. Pemberton understood immediately what Anne was asking. Not a diagnosis, not a public statement, an investigation, a quiet, comprehensive, medically rigorous assessment of the King's cognitive function, conducted under the guise of routine health monitoring, with results reported directly to the Princess Royal and the King himself. No one else. Not the Prince of Wales, not the Queen Consort, not the press office. Just the doctors, the King, and Anne Charles agreed to the assessment because Charles always agrees to medical protocols. He is a man who believes in systems, in process, in the orderly management of the body as an instrument of state. He submitted to the testing without complaint. Blood work, neuroimaging, cognitive function batteries, sleep studies, cardiac monitoring, 14 weeks of data collection, conducted in fragments between official engagements, in the early hours before dawn, in the quiet rooms of the palace where no staff could observe. The results came back on a Tuesday in late March. Dr. Pemberton reviewed them in her office at St. Thomas's Hospital, then reviewed them again. Then she called 2 colleagues, a neurologist, a geriatric specialist. They reviewed them together, then they called a third, then a fourth. By the end of the week, 5 senior physicians had examined the data independently and reached the same conclusion. The King was not dying. He was not facing an immediate crisis, but he was experiencing a progressive, irreversible decline in cognitive processing speed and short-term memory consolidation. The condition was manageable, it was treatable, but it was not reversible, and it would worsen. The doctor's recommendation was clear, measured, and medically sound. Reduce the King's working schedule by 70%. Eliminate all evening engagements. Limit public appearances to 2 per week. Prepare a formal regency plan within 18 months. Transfer the daily Red Box intelligence briefings to the Prince of Wales immediately, and begin the process of drafting the legal instruments that would allow William to assume sovereign duties when the time came. This recommendation was delivered to Charles on a Thursday morning. He read it in his study. He set it aside. He did not discuss it with Camilla. He did not discuss it with William. He did not discuss it with Anne. He simply set it aside, as one sets aside a letter containing news one has already anticipated. Because Charles had known, not the specifics, not the medical terminology, but he had felt it, the half-second pauses, the lost threads, the repeated questions. He'd felt his own mind beginning to fray at the edges, like a tapestry left too long in sunlight, and he'd been waiting for someone to confirm it. But Charles did not accept the doctor's recommendation. He did not reject it either. He simply reinterpreted it. He read the phrase, prepare a formal regency plan, and he understood what it meant. It meant William would step into his shoes. It meant the machinery of the crown would transfer, piece by piece, from father to son. It meant the end of his active reign. And Charles, who had waited 70 years for this throne, who had endured scandal and heartbreak and public humiliation to reach this chair, was not ready to leave it. Not yet. Not like this. Not to a process. Not to a protocol. Not to a slow, managed decline supervised by doctors and lawyers and his own son's patient, expectant eyes. So Charles did something else. Something no one expected. Something no one had prepared for. He drafted a decree, not a regency plan, not a reduction in duties, not a transfer of power, a decree, a formal, legally binding sovereign decree that would restructure the very nature of royal authority in the event of incapacity. And he drafted it alone, in his study, at 3 a.m., with only a fountain pen, a legal pad, and the quiet company of his own deteriorating mind. Now, let me explain what this decree actually says, because its contents are the most extraordinary constitutional document produced by the British monarchy in 3 centuries. The decree is titled the Sovereign Continuity Protocol. It consists of 4 pages, written in Charles's distinctive, looping handwriting, later transcribed by the Lord Chancellor's office into formal legal language. It contains 7 articles. I will walk you through each one, because each one represents a seismic shift in how the British Crown operates. Article 1 establishes that in the event of sovereign incapacity lasting longer than 72 consecutive hours, a Regency Council of 5 shall be convened. This council shall assume all sovereign duties collectively, not individually, not sequentially, collectively. The 5 members of this council are the Prince of Wales, the Princess Royal, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Princess of Wales, and the Queen Consort. 5 people, not 1. Not a single regent stepping into the monarch's shoes. 5 people governing together, making decisions by majority vote. Let me pause here, because this is the moment where the entire foundation of British constitutional monarchy cracks open. For 300 years, since the Regency Act of 1705, the principle has been absolute. Sovereignty is indivisible. One person holds the crown. One person makes the decisions. One person bears the... In the event of incapacity, a single regent is appointed to act in the sovereign's name. One person, not a committee, not a council, not a vote, one. Charles's decree abolishes this principle. It replaces individual regency with collective governance. It replaces the singular authority of the crown with a parliamentary model of shared power. It transforms the monarchy, in the moment of crisis, from a dictatorship into a democracy. And it does so without consulting Parliament, without consulting the Privy Council, without consulting the Prime Minister, without consulting William.
The King drafted it alone, at 3 a.m., and sealed it with his own signet ring before dawn.
Article 2 specifies the voting mechanism. All decisions of the Regency Council require a minimum of 3 votes in favour. In the event of a tie, 2 against 2, with 1 abstention, the matter is referred to the Lord Chief Justice for binding arbitration. This means that in a crisis, the fate of the crown could be decided not by royal blood, not by constitutional tradition, not by the sovereign's personal judgment, but by a judge, a civilian, an unelected official with no royal authority whatsoever. Article 3 establishes Catherine's role within the council. And this is where William's shock transforms into something deeper, something more personal, more visceral. The decree grants Catherine not merely a seat on the council, but a specific constitutional designation, Sovereign's Advocate. This title, invented by Charles for this purpose alone, grants Catherine the right to review all council decisions before they are executed, the right to request additional information, the right to delay any decision by 48 hours for further review, and the right to veto any decision she deems contrary to the long-term institutional interest of the Crown. Let me repeat that. Catherine has a veto. Catherine, who is not a royal by blood, who married into the family, who was a commoner 18 years ago, has been granted the constitutional authority to veto decisions made by the Prince of Wales, the Princess Royal, and the Duke of Edinburgh. She can stop them, she can overrule them, she can say no, and her no carries the weight of sovereign authority. Article 4 addresses Camilla's inclusion. The Queen Consort is granted a seat on the council not as a voting member with equal weight, but as sovereign's memory. This title grants her access to all historical precedents, all archived decisions, all institutional knowledge accumulated during her time as consort. She cannot vote, but she can advise. She can remind. She can say, "This is what happened last time. This is what the Queen would have done. This is the precedent." And her advisory role is constitutionally protected. She cannot be removed from the Council without the unanimous consent of all other members. Article 5 specifies the trigger mechanism. The Regency Council is convened when three conditions are met simultaneously. First, the Sovereign's personal physician certifies incapacity. Second, the Lord Chancellor confirms the certification in writing. Third, 48 hours have elapsed without the Sovereign personally revoking the certification. This three-lock mechanism ensures that no single individual can trigger the Council unilaterally. It requires medical, legal, and temporal confirmation. Article 6 addresses the duration. The Regency Council remains active until the Sovereign personally resumes duties or until death. There is no automatic dissolution. There is no time limit. There is no provision for the Council to vote itself out of existence. Once convened, it persists. This means that if Charles experiences a period of incapacity lasting longer than 72 hours, William does not become king. He becomes 1/5 of a committee, and he remains 1/5 of a committee until Charles either recovers or dies. Article 7 is the final clause. It states that the Sovereign Continuity Protocol is it cannot be amended, suspended, or appealed by any future sovereign. It is sealed under the royal prerogative and registered with the Privy Council as a permanent constitutional instrument. Once Charles signs it, and he has already signed it, it becomes law. Not policy, not guidance, law, binding on William, binding on George, binding on every monarch who follows. The chain of succession is permanently altered, the nature of sovereignty is permanently changed, and no one was consulted. Now, let's return to that small windowless room. Let's return to the moment where Dr. Pemberton finished her medical briefing and looked at the King, expecting him to accept the recommendation, expecting him
To agree to the 70% reduction.
expecting him to begin the slow, dignified process of handing over the reins to his son. That is what she expected. That is what William expected. That is what Anne expected. That is what the institution expected. Charles did not give them. Charles reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a folded document. 4 pages, his own handwriting. He placed it on the steel examination table between the 4 chairs. He looked at William. He looked at Anne. And he said in a voice that was steady, clear, and absolutely final, "I will not step back. I will not reduce my duties. I will not prepare a regency for William. I will not hand this crown over in pieces while I still draw breath." He paused. "Instead, I have prepared this." William picked up the document. He read it. Anne leaned over and read it with him.
The room was silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent light and the soft rustle of paper being turned.
William read Article 1. His expression did not change. He read Article 2. His jaw tightened. He read Article 3. His eyes flickered to the empty 4th chair, Catherine's chair, and back to the page. He read Article 4. He read Article 5. He read Article 6. He read Article... And when he finished, he placed the document back on the table with a precision that was itself a form of violence. "You've abolished the Regency," William said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but beneath the control was something vast and cold. "You've abolished the Regency and replaced it with a committee." Charles nodded. "I have replaced individual vulnerability with collective strength. No single person should bear the weight of the crown in a moment of crisis. Not you, not me, not anyone." William's hands were flat on the table. His knuckles were white. "This isn't about strength, Father. This is about control. You don't want to let go, so you've built a system where no one else can take hold." Charles's response was immediate and sharp. "That is not what this is." William stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His anger was not hot. It was glacial. It was the anger of a man who has spent his entire life preparing for a moment that has just been stolen from him. You have given Catherine a veto. You have given Camilla a constitutional role. You have made Edward a voting member. You have turned the sovereign into a parliament, and you have done it without asking me. without telling me, without giving me the dignity of knowing that the future I was born to inherit has been redesigned while I wasn't looking. Anne spoke next. Her voice was measured, analytical, stripped of emotion. "William, sit down." William did not sit. "Sit down," Anne repeated.
"And listen to what he is actually saying."
William sat. Anne turned to Charles. "You're not abolishing the regency because you fear losing the throne. You are abolishing it because you fear what happens when one person holds all the power in a moment of weakness. You watched your mother carry the weight alone for 70 years. You watched it break her in places no one could see, and you are determined that no one else will carry it alone." Charles looked at his sister. His eyes were wet, not with tears, with recognition. "Yes," he said. "Yes, that is exactly what I am doing." The room fell silent again. William's anger did not dissipate, but it shifted. It became more complex, more layered. He understood in that moment that his father's decree was not an act of selfishness. It was an act of terror. The terror of a man who knows his mind is failing and who cannot bear the thought of his son standing alone in the same storm that nearly destroyed him. Catherine arrived at 11:03 am. She entered the room without announcement, without preamble. She saw the document on the table. She saw William's face. She saw Anne's stillness. She saw Charles's red eyes. She sat in the fourth chair. She picked up the document. She read it. All 4 pages, all 7 articles. She read it slowly, carefully, with the focused attention of a woman who understands that words on paper are the architecture of power. When she finished, she placed it back on the table and looked at Charles. "You gave me a veto," she said. "Not a question. A statement." Charles nodded. "I gave you the authority to protect the institution from decisions made in haste, in anger, or in grief. You are the only person in that council who has no blood claim to the throne. You have no dynastic interest, no personal ambition. Your only interest is the health of the institution itself. That makes you the only truly impartial voice." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "William will hate it." Charles looked at his son. "William already hates it." William met his father's gaze. "I don't hate the intention. I hate the execution. You did this alone, in the dark, without me." The medical dimension of this crisis cannot be separated from the constitutional one. Dr. Pemberton, still standing, still holding her file, watched this family negotiation with the quiet horror of a physician who has delivered a diagnosis and triggered an earthquake. Her medical recommendation was straightforward: reduce workload, prepare for transition, protect the patient. What she was witnessing instead was a sovereign using his diagnosis as leverage to restructure the state. The medicine had become politics, the body had become the constitution, and there was nothing she could do about it. She spoke one final time. "Your Majesty, I must note for the record that the Sovereign Continuity Protocol does not address the medical management of your condition. It addresses the governance of the Crown during incapacity. It does not address the treatment, monitoring, or daily management of your cognitive health. Those remain my responsibility, and I must insist that your personal medical schedule continues regardless of any constitutional arrangements you have made." "Of course. I am not refusing treatment. I am refusing to be replaced." The distinction is critical, and it reveals the core of Charles's psychology. He does not fear death. He does not fear pain. He fears irrelevance. He fears becoming a figurehead, a signature, a name on a document that someone else has already decided. He spent 70 years waiting to be king. He will not spend his final years being a patient. The decree is not about governance, it is about dignity. It is about a man saying with his last coherent authority, "I will not be managed, I will not be transitioned, I will not be eased gently into the night while my son takes my chair. If I must fall, I will fall standing, and I will not fall alone." William understood this. He understood it completely. And that understanding made his anger more painful, not less, because he could not argue with his father's fear. He could not say, "You are wrong to be afraid." He could not say, "You are wrong to want dignity." He could only say, "You are wrong to impose your fear on my future. You are wrong to redesign the throne I will inherit without asking me what kind of throne I want." And that argument, the argument of the heir against the sovereign, is the oldest argument in royal history. And it never resolves cleanly. It only ends when one of them dies. Anne's role in the aftermath has been characteristically understated but profoundly significant. She left the medical consultation suite at 11:47 a.m. and walked directly to her private office in the palace. She closed the door, she sat at her desk, and she wrote a memorandum. Not to Charles, not to William, to herself. A private record of what had happened, what had been said, and what she believed would come next. This memorandum, which has not been made public, reportedly contains a single line of assessment that captures the entire crisis in 9 words. He built a parliament because he feared a king. Anna understands, better than anyone in the family, that Charles's decree is not just about his own incapacity. It is about the next incapacity, and the one after that, and the one after that. By making the Regency Council permanent and irrevocable, Charles has ensured that every future sovereign who experiences cognitive decline will face the same collective governance model. William will face it, George will face it. Every monarch who follows will be subject to the same 5-person committee, the same voting mechanism, the same veto power. Charles has not just changed his own future, he has changed the future of every king and queen who will ever sit on the throne. Catherine's private response, in the hours following the meeting, was strategic rather than emotional. She returned to Kensington Palace and spent the remainder of the afternoon in her basement strategy room with her senior private secretary and a constitutional law specialist. They reviewed the decree article by article, clause by clause, word by word. Their objective was not to challenge it, it was to understand it, to map its implications, to identify the areas where Catherine's new authority, the veto, the 48-hour delay, the information request rights, could be used to protect the institution without creating conflict with William. By 6 p.m, Catherine had drafted a personal protocol for her own conduct within the future Regency Council. The protocol, which she shared with William that evening, contained 3 principles. First, she would never use her veto against William personally. She would only use it against decisions she believed were institutionally harmful. Second, she would never vote in a way that created a public split between herself and her husband. If they disagreed, they would resolve it privately before the council met. Third, she would use her 48-hour delay power only in genuine emergencies, not as a routine obstruction tool. William read the protocol. He read it twice. Then he looked at Catherine and said, "You're already preparing for it." Catherine replied, "Someone has to. You're too angry to plan, and anger makes bad decisions." William was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "You're right. I'm angry. But I need to think past the... Because if I don't, this council will be dysfunctional from the first meeting. And a dysfunctional council is worse than no council at all." The inclusion of Camilla in the decree has created a complex layered dynamic that no one fully anticipated. Camilla was not present at the medical consultation. She was not informed of the decree until that evening, when Charles visited her at Clarence House and told her personally. His words, according to those present, were simple. "I need you to be part of this, not as a voter, not as a decision-maker, as a memory, as the person who knows what it costs to stand beside the throne. I need you to remind them what they are protecting." Was not immediate. She sat with the information for a long time. The woman who had been locked out of Buckingham Palace in a previous crisis. The woman who had been stripped of duties, expelled from Windsor, denied a future beyond Charles's reign. That woman was now being offered a permanent constitutional role. Not power, not authority, but presence. A guaranteed seat at the table where decisions are made, a protected advisory role that no future sovereign can revoke without unanimous consent. She accepted, not with enthusiasm, not with gratitude, with the quiet, weary acceptance of a woman who has learned that the institution gives and takes according to its own logic, and that the only sensible response is to accept what is offered while it is offered. She told Charles, "I will be the memory, but I will not be the conscience. I will remind them of precedent. I will not tell them what is right. That is not my place. That is all I ask." The legal registration of the Sovereign Continuity Protocol took place on Friday morning. The document was transcribed from Charles's handwriting into formal legal language by the Lord Chancellor's office. It was reviewed by the Attorney General. It was countersigned by the Prime Minister, who had been briefed in advance and offered no objection. It was sealed with the Great Seal of the realm, and it was entered into the Constitutional Register as a permanent instrument of state. The registration was completed at 10:47 a.m. At 10:48 a.m., the constitutional architecture of the British monarchy was permanently altered. No announcement was made, no press release was issued. The change was silent, absolute, and irreversible. The public will learn of the decree eventually. Perhaps when Charles first experiences a public episode, perhaps when the Regency Council is convened for the first time, perhaps decades from now, when historians open the sealed archives and discover the 4-page document that changed everything. But for now, it exists in silence, known only to those who were in the room, and to the lawyers who registered it, and to the institution itself, which absorbs the change as it absorbs all changes, quietly, completely, and without looking. Let's examine the historical parallels, because this decree does not exist in a vacuum. The British monarchy has faced succession crises before. The Regency crisis of 1788, when George III's madness forced Parliament to consider appointing the Prince of Wales as regent. The abdication crisis of 1936, when Edward VIII's desire to marry Wallis Simpson forced a choice between love and duty. The accession crisis of 1952, when George VI's death thrust a 25-year-old Elizabeth onto the throne without preparation or consent. Each of these crises was resolved through the assertion of individual authority. One person stepped forward, one person bore the weight, one person made the decision. Charles's decree breaks this pattern. It says, no more individual martyrdom, no more solitary suffering, no more one person carrying the entire institution on their shoulders until it breaks them. The crown will be shared, the burden will be distributed, the weight will be borne by 5 pairs of hands instead of one. Whether this is wisdom or folly is the question that will define the next century of the British monarchy. William believes it is folly. He believes that sovereignty requires singularity, that the crown is not a committee project, that the public needs one person to look up to, one person to blame, one person to love. He believes that diluting the sovereign's authority across 5 individuals will create confusion, infighting, paralysis. He believes it will weaken the monarchy at the moment it most needs strength. Charles believes it is wisdom. He believes that the era of the solitary monarch is over, that no single human being can bear the psychological weight of the crown in the modern media environment, that the institution must evolve or die, that sharing the burden is not weakness, but adaptation, that 5 minds are stronger than one, that a council can correct the errors that a single sovereign cannot, that the monarchy's survival depends not on the strength of one individual, but on the resilience of its structures. Both men may be right, both men may be wrong. The truth will only reveal itself in practice, when the first crisis comes, when the first vote is taken, when Catherine exercises her veto for the first time, when Camilla reminds the council of a precedent everyone else has forgotten, when William finds himself outvoted 3-2 on a matter he considers vital. That is when the decree will be tested. That is when the theory becomes reality. And that is when we will learn whether Charles's midnight document was an act of visionary reform or a desperate final grasp at control by a man watching his own mind dissolve. The medical reality underlying all of this cannot be ignored. Charles's condition is progressive. It is irreversible. It will worsen. The half-second pauses will become full-second pauses. The lost threads will become lost paragraphs. The repeated questions will become repeated conversations, repeated decisions, repeated moments of confusion that can no longer be hidden behind a smile and a change of subject. The king knows this. The doctors know this. William knows this. And the decree is Charles's way of saying, I will not let this happen to me alone. I will not let this happen to you alone. We will face it together, all 5 of us, together. This is, perhaps, the most human aspect of the entire crisis. Beneath the constitutional language, the legal formalities, the political implications, there is a simple, devastating truth. A father is afraid. Afraid of losing himself. Afraid of burdening his son. Afraid of dying slowly, publicly, in front of the cameras and the crowds and the courtiers who will watch his decline with pity and impatience. And in his fear, he reached for the only tool he has, the sovereign's pen. And he wrote a document that says, I will not be alone, and neither will you. William's anger, in the end, is not really about the decree. It is about the loss. The loss of the future he imagined. The loss of the moment he would step forward, alone, into his father's shoes and feel the full, terrible, magnificent weight of the crown settle onto his own head. That moment has been taken from him, replaced by a committee, a vote, a shared responsibility. And no matter how wise the arrangement, no matter how well-intentioned, William mourns the loss of that singular moment, the moment he was born for, the moment that defined his entire existence, and his father, in his fear, in his love, in his desperate desire to protect his son from the loneliness of sovereignty, has stolen it. Catherine understands this grief. She holds it gently, carefully, without trying to fix it. She does not say, "It will be better this way." She does not say, "You should be grateful." She simply sits beside William in the quiet hours of the evening and lets him be angry, lets him grieve, lets him rage against a future that has been redesigned without his consent. And when the anger passes, when the grief settles, she will be there. Not as his not as his colleague, as his wife. The one person in the council who owes him nothing except love. Anne's perspective remains the most institutionally grounded. She has served the crown for 73 years. She has watched her mother carry the weight alone. She has watched her brother struggle under it. She has watched her nephews prepare for it. And she has concluded, with the cold clarity of a lifetime's observation, that the weight is too much for one person. It has always been too much. The monarchy has survived not because its sovereigns were superhuman, but because they had support. Quiet.
Invisible support. The private secretaries, the equerries, the wives, the siblings, the council of the unspoken. Charles's decree simply makes that support visible, formal, constitutional. It takes the informal network of care that has always surrounded the sovereign and gives it legal standing. It says, the people who hold the king up are not servants. They are partners. They have rights. They have authority. They have a vote. And in doing so, it transforms the monarchy from a one-person show into a company, an ensemble, a family in the truest sense of the word. Whether the public will accept an ensemble monarchy remains to be seen. But the institution itself has already adapted. It always does. The role of the Prime Minister in this crisis has been deliberately minimal. The decree was presented to the head of government as a fait accompli, not for approval, not for debate, for registration. The Prime Minister, briefed by the Lord Chancellor at 9 a.m. on Friday, read the document, asked 2 clarifying questions, and signed the counter-signature. No objection was raised. No parliamentary debate was requested. The Prime Minister understood, as all Prime Ministers understand, that the sovereign's personal arrangements are not a matter for elected government. The Crown manages its own succession. Parliament manages the state. The boundary is absolute. But the boundary is also porous. If the Regency Council is convened, if 5 individuals are making sovereign decisions by majority vote, the line between royal prerogative and democratic governance becomes blurred. A future Prime Minister may find themselves negotiating not with a single sovereign, but with a committee. A future Parliament may find that the Council's decisions conflict with legislative intent. A future crisis may require speed and decisiveness that a 5-person vote cannot provide. These are the challenges that lie ahead. Uncharted, unprecedented, unresolved. The press does not know. The public does not know. The courtiers who staff the palace corridors do not know. The information is contained within a circle of fewer than 20 individuals. The 5 council members, the 3 doctors, the Lord Chancellor, the Attorney General, the Prime Minister, Sir Michael Stevens, Sir Clive Alderton, the 2 witnesses who observed the signing, and the archivist who registered the document. 20 people hold the knowledge that the British monarchy has been fundamentally restructured, and not one of them has spoken. Not one of them will speak. The secret is safe, for now. The question of disclosure will become urgent the first time the council is convened, the first time Charles experiences a public episode of confusion, the first time a scheduled engagement is cancelled without clear explanation, the first time a red box is delivered to Kensington Palace instead of Buckingham Palace. At that moment, the public will demand answers, and the palace will have to decide. Do we tell the truth? Do we say, the king is unwell, and a council of 5 is now governing in his stead?
Or do we maintain the fiction of singular sovereignty, the image of one king on one throne, while the real power is distributed across a committee in a windowless room? Catherine has already prepared for this moment. Her protocol includes a communication strategy. The council's existence will be announced only when absolutely necessary. The framing will emphasize continuity, not crisis. The message will be, the king continues to reign. The institution continues to function. The support structures have been strengthened. No mention of cognitive decline. No mention of medical diagnosis. No mention of the midnight document. Just strength, stability, continuity. The same three words the palace has used for every crisis since 1952. William's preparation is different. He's begun studying the operational mechanics of collective governance. How does a council vote? How are disagreements resolved? How is information shared securely among 5 individuals with different clearance levels, different locations, different schedules? How is a decision documented? How is it communicated? How is it reversed if circumstances change? These are not constitutional questions. They are logistical questions. And William, for all his anger, is a practical man. He is already building the machinery that will make the council functional, because if it must exist, it must work. And he will not allow it to fail. Anne's preparation is the simplest and the most profound. She has written a letter, not to the council, not to Charles, to herself. A letter to be opened only if the council is convened and she finds herself in the position of casting the deciding vote. The letter contains a single instruction. Remember what Mother would do, then do the opposite. She carried it alone because she believed she had to. You do not have to. You never did. It is the most personal document Anne has ever written.
And it is the most revealing.
Because it admits, in private, what she has never admitted in public. That the Queen's solitude was not strength, it was suffering, and Anne will not suffer alone. Camilla's preparation is the most human. She has begun compiling a personal archive, not of state papers or constitutional precedents, of memories, handwritten notes from Elizabeth, photographs from private family gatherings, snippets of conversation recorded in her own hand from moments when the late Queen dropped her guard and spoke honestly about the weight she carried. Camilla is building a library of intimacy, a record of what the crown costs the people who wear it. And when the council convenes, when the 5 individuals sit around a table and debate the fate of the institution, Camilla will open this library, and she will say, "Remember, this is what it costs. This is what she endured. This is what you are asking of yourselves. Is it worth it?"
The council is formed. The medical reality is acknowledged.
The future is set. And in the small, windowless room on the ground floor of Buckingham Palace, the fluorescent light continues to hum. The 4 chairs remain. The steel examination table gleams. The cabinet of pharmaceutical supplies stands locked and silent. Nothing in the room has changed. And everything in the world outside it has changed forever. King Charles will continue to reign. He will attend engagements. He will sign documents. He will greet ambassadors and award medals and walk through gardens and speak to crowds. He will do all of this while his mind slowly, quietly, imperceptibly frays. And when the day comes when he can no longer do it, when the half-second pause becomes a full stop, when the lost thread cannot be found, when the repeated question goes unanswered, he will not fall alone. 5 hands will catch him. 5 voices will speak for him.
5 minds will carry what one mind can no longer bear.
Whether this is mercy or madness, whether this is evolution or erosion, whether this is the salvation of the monarchy or the beginning of its end, none of us can say. We can only watch. We can only wait. We can only observe as the institution we have known for 1,000 years reshapes itself in the image of one frightened man's midnight decree. And we can hope, fervently, desperately, with everything we have, that the 5 hands are strong enough, that the 5 voices are wise enough, that the 5 minds are clear enough, to carry what one man could not carry alone. The palace doctors will continue their monitoring. Dr. Pemberton will review the King's cognitive assessments every 6 weeks. She will track the progression. She will adjust the medication. She will note the changes. And when the changes become too significant to manage, she will make the call. The call that triggers the 72-hour clock. The call that convenes the council. The call that ends one era and begins another.
She does not want to make that call. No one does. But it will come. It always comes. The body fails, the mind fades, the crown passes. The only question is how. And Charles, in his fear, in his love, in his desperate, brilliant, flawed humanity, has answered that question. Not with a whisper, with a decree. William will be ready. He hates the mechanism, but he will. He has spent his entire life preparing for this moment, and even in its altered form, even stripped of its singularity, he will step forward. Not alone, never again alone, but forward. And Catherine will be beside him, not behind, not beneath, beside, equal, armed with her veto and her 48 hours and her unshakable belief that the institution matters more than any individual who serves it. Together, they will form the core of the council, the engine, the axis, the two people who will hold the others together when the disagreements come, and the disagreements will come. Anne will be the anchor, the institutional memory. The woman who has served longer than anyone, who has seen more, who has endured more, who has less patience for sentiment and more respect for duty. She will cut through the noise. She will demand clarity. She will refuse to let the council drown in its own deliberations. She will be the voice that says, "Decide, now. The crown cannot wait." And they will decide. Because Anne does not allow indecision. Not in herself, not in others, not in the institution she has served for 73 years. Edward will be the quiet vote, the brother who does not seek the spotlight, who does not crave authority, who accepts his seat on the council with the same uncomplaining diligence with which he accepts every duty. He will vote carefully, he will speak rarely, but when he speaks, the others will listen. Because Edward is the only member of the council who has no personal ambition, no dynastic agenda, no score to settle. He votes for the institution, always, only. And in a council of strong personalities, his quiet objectivity will be the tiebreaker more often than anyone expects. Camilla will be the ghost at the table, the woman who was locked out, expelled, stripped, denied, and who now sits constitutionally protected in a room where decisions are made. She will not speak often. She will not vote. But she will remember. And memory, in an institution built on precedent, is its own form of power. She will say, "The Queen did it this way." And the room will fall silent, because the Queen's name still carries weight, still commands respect, still bends the arc of a decision towards tradition. Camilla will wield that name gently, carefully, but she will wield it, and it will matter. The public will adapt. The public always adapts. They will learn eventually that the king is unwell, that a council governs, that the decisions are made by committee, and they will accept it because the British public has always accepted what the monarchy presents to them, provided it is presented with dignity, with continuity, with the unbroken thread of ceremony that connects the present to the past. The council will wear the robes, will sit in the throne room, will speak with the sovereign's voice, and the public will see the crown, not the committee. They will see the institution, not the individuals, and the illusion will hold, because the illusion is the institution. It has always been the illusion. Charles knows this. He has always known this. The crown is not the person who wears it. The crown is the idea, the symbol, the story, and the story can be told by 5 voices as easily as by 1, provided the voices are harmonious, provided the story is consistent, provided the ritual is unbroken. His decree is not an ending, it is a translation, a rendering of the ancient story into a new language, a language of shared burden, of distributed weight, of collective responsibility. And if the translation is faithful, the story will survive. If it is not, the story will end. And everything Charles loves will end with it. The fluorescent light in the medical consultation suite continues to hum. The 4 chairs stand empty now. The doctors have gone. The king has returned to his study. The prince has returned to Kensington Palace. The Princess Royal has returned to her office. The 4th chair, Catherine's chair, has been pushed back against the wall, ready for the next meeting, the next crisis, the next decision. The room waits, the palace waits, the crown waits, and somewhere in a vault beneath Windsor Castle, the sealed document rests. 4 pages, 7 articles, 1 midnight act of fear and love, waiting for the moment it must be activated, waiting for the 72-hour clock to begin, waiting for the 5 to become 1, and for the 1 to become 5.
What do you think? Is Charles's decree an act of visionary reform or a desperate grasp at control? Will the Regency Council strengthen the monarchy or weaken it? Is Catherine's veto a stroke of genius or a recipe for conflict? Should William have been consulted before the decree was drafted? Does the public have a right to know about the King's condition? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This is the most significant constitutional development in 300 years, and your perspective matters. We read every single comment, every single one. And the conversation in this community always deepens our understanding. And if you want to stay ahead of the royal stories the mainstream media won't touch, make sure you're subscribed to Crown Watch. Turn on the notification bell. Share this video with someone who understands that the real story is always behind the sealed doors, in the windowless rooms, in the midnight documents that change everything. Because the British monarchy is not what you see on television. It's what happens when the cameras are off, when the doors are closed, when the pen touches the paper. And one man, afraid of the dark, writes a decree that says, "I will not face this alone." Stay curious, stay informed, stay questioning, and remember, the crown is heavier than it looks, and no one should carry it alone. Until next time, keep your eyes on the empty chairs, keep your ears tuned to the silence, and keep watching the details, because the next crisis is already forming. The next midnight document is already being written, and the next windowless room is already waiting. Goodbye.